Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is February 19th, 2021, and I am super excited for today's interview. It's one that I've wanted to do for at least a year, if not more. Today, we're going to be interviewing Matthew and Elizabeth Shakespear. This is one in a series of episodes that I've done on Mormon Stories where we interview former Mormon bishops. And this is interesting and different in several ways. So we're going to be talking about Matthew Shakespeare's life growing up in the church, getting married in the temple, having children, doing all the things that lead up to him being called as a Mormon bishop around 2015 timeframe.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's kind of one angle. And then what we're going to be talking about is what happens when Bishop Shakespeare starts to learn about Kate Kelly and John DeLynn and Bill Reel and Mormon Stories Podcast and all the issues around Mormon faith crises while he's serving as a bishop. And that's kind of one part of the story. And then while he's serving as bishop, he begins counseling Elizabeth, who is a member of his congregation or of his ward.
Right.
And as he finds his faith sort of unraveling, he also, I don't know if I want to say falls in love or becomes emotionally attached to Elizabeth, who is not his wife at the time, but who's a ward member. And you know what that's like. And eventually, Matthew ends up, asking to be released as bishop. And he and his wife at the time end up divorcing, and Matthew ends up marrying Elizabeth. And then they have their journey from there. So this is going to be a really interesting and epic Mormon Stories Podcast interview about Mormonism, about serving in the church, about faith crises, about what do you do when you're a bishop having a faith crisis. It's going to be about divorce. It's going to be about reconstruction. It's going to be about finding love. And of course, there's Elizabeth's story, which is her own journey, which is separate from Matthew's, which we're going to weave in as well. So with all that as an intro, I'm super excited for today's interview. And without any further ado, welcome Matthew and Elizabeth to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you.
Great to have you guys.
It's good to be here. It's kind of, surreal in many respects. So looking forward to it and nervous as well at the same time. Certainly wanting to share a story that I think will be interesting. I hope it will be helpful for some people. I hope it's most importantly intellectually honest. I don't want to tell stories to try and paint myself to look
flawless. You don't want to look flawless.
Yeah, exactly. But certainly want to acknowledge, I guess, just the humanity that exists in all of us, and that I think what we'll probably see here as we share our story is that, a case could probably be made for staying closer and staying in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And a case will also be able to be made for moving away from it based on our experiences. So, and that's, I guess, the paradox of the human condition, right? And so I'm opening my heart, realizing that there will be critics who, at least I think there'll probably be critics who would like to speak harshly about me and my experience. And that's okay. But I'm willing to jump into the arena and be real and be honest. And I guess that's what I hope for today. And I'm an emotional guy, so be prepared for maybe some of that.
Beautiful.
Well
what do you
said.
have to say, honey?
Anything you want to add, Elizabeth?
Well, I mean, just more on that fact, I guess, is to say that obviously the way that something is framed is important. And there are infinite ways to frame something. And that is kind of one of the things that's at the heart of the matter of everything for me is honesty. And it's even sad that we can break it down into what's called intellectual honesty, and that's kind of the hot word these days. But, you know, how we frame things, how we share them, how we color it. You know, at the core, I think we all know what is true and what is real. But man, life is complicated, and we want to be kind and we want to be benevolent, but also that means that we're often not honest and we're not real, you know, and we excuse that, we hide it, we color it, cover it up, you know, and sometimes we pretend like it's to be kind and benevolent. I don't think that that's always true either. So I think that I have a lot of respect for Matthew's courage, and he has a lot more at stake than I do when it comes to the culture of Mormonism, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, I'll just say it's hard just to be public, especially if you're generally a private person. And then within the Mormonism realm, high demand religions, people are terrified to to friend me on Facebook or even like a Facebook post I make, let alone come on Mormon Stories podcast and tell their story. But then when you add to that, having been a bishop, and then you add to it, having fallen in love with someone else while you're married, while you're a bishop, and the fact that there are all sorts of talk and rumors that would surround that, especially around, allegations of infidelity or whatever, like that's super, who does that? Almost nobody. And just being willing to openly and candidly discuss with sensitivity head on in those multiple complex contexts is just it's a moving act of courage and honesty and bravery. So hats off to you guys before we even begin.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm reminded of this Pema Chodron quote. I guess I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's something that only when we're willing to face annihilation over and over again do we really find out what substance is really there as a person. So here I am, opening up to some annihilation maybe, but I'm happy to be here.
All right. So let's dig in. Maybe let's start, Matthew, if it's okay. Let's start with your story, kind of your Mormon story.
Yeah.
How do you get from childhood to becoming a Mormon bishop? Something that few of us got to actually accomplish. How did that happen?
Oh, wow. Well, I grew up in a little town, little community in southern Utah, in a multi-generational Mormon family. There's some parts of my, some branches of my family tree that go back to kind of the Restoration, Joseph Smith time period. The Shakespeare name kind of joined in a little bit later. They came across the plains on a train rather than in a wagon. But some other parts of my family were maybe more pioneer stock.
Would the Shakespeares be related to William Shakespeare?
Yeah, so we are related. We can trace our roots back to Stratford-on-Avon, but not directly through the playwright. We come kind of through his uncle's line, but definitely related. It's funny, one branch of my family, a few generations back, has the E on the end, like the playwright spelt it, the Old English spelling. And then my side of the family does, I say the E fell off in the ocean when they immigrated to the U.S. So, but we are still, all still related, all through the same kind of family line. So, small community where basically the community of Tropic, Utah.
Where's Tropic?
It's down near Bryce Canyon National Park. So if you were to go to Bryce Canyon National Park and look off down into the valley below the national park, there's a small community, about 300 people. That's Tropic.
Okay.
Not tropical at all.
Not tropical at all, but it's where I grew up. It's where my father grew up, and it's where his father grew up. So my family has generational ties to the community.
What was the profession?
So my father was a high school science teacher. And my grandfather did a little bit of everything. He did some cattle ranching. He ran a coal mine with his brothers. He worked for the Forest Service as well. He contracted with the Forest Service to spray trees, beetle trees, and that kind of stuff. And so he did a little bit of everything, whatever it took to put bread on the table. My dad did also continue the family legacy of running beef cattle. So he had a small cattle ranch that kept us children busy as we grew up. It didn't really make a lot of money, but it kept us busy and taught us how to work. So, but my family name, just had a strong presence in the community and a good reputation. My uncle, my dad's older brother, served as bishop in the ward there. My dad served as bishop in the ward. My great-great-grandfather was one of the first missionaries that left from the Tropic Ward to serve as a missionary. So a big, multi-generational kind of expectation, and that's okay. I mean, there wasn't anything wrong with that. In fact, I loved it growing up in that way.
Is there a Tropic High School?
It's called Bryce Valley.
Okay.
Bryce Valley High School. So it combines, the park service has the housing there, so it combines the families that live there, as well as what's called Bryce Canyon City now, which basically composes Ruby's Inn down there near Bryce. And then Henryville, Cannonville, and Tropic all go into that high school. I graduated with a class of 22 people.
Oh, wow. That's super small.
Super small. So,
dang.
One ward, a big ward. I mean, all 300, pretty much everybody in town was a member of the church. Very supportive. I mean, the elderly people in town loved the youth. They cared. And, they really just supported one another. I think it's the same way even now, it's just a really tight-knit community. Like any family in a way that has their ups and downs, their arguments and so forth. But in the end, the people of that community, it was really a charmed place to grow up. And they were really just supportive. It was the older women in the church were always encouraging and helpful, and they would, if you were a priest and you were blessed in the sacrament, they would come up to you and say, "Oh, you say that prayer, you say the sacrament prayers so well. You're at least in my experience anyway." They would do that, and I really, of course, that really stroked the ego, right? It really helped me feel good and felt like I was an achiever in the system, right? And you would appreciate it too, John. The big sport in town was basketball. I'm relatively tall and an okay basketball player, and so I felt in many respects as a youth kind of like, well, I guess a star in some ways, right? So well respected because of my family name. I tried to do what was right and tried to look good. But, with that also comes this idea of wanting to look good. And I think this is an important part of the whole theme of what we want to share today, is that in the process of that, sometimes we are, as human beings, are willing to share that maybe white lie. What you could say is maybe a slight deception to make yourself look better than you really are.
I think it's important to note that these are second half of life realizations.
Absolutely.
I think, this doesn't come easily. And people go the whole second half of their life without reconciling the truth of that too. And so
Yeah,
that's
right.
why
Definitely.
It's a heavy thing.
I mean,
Goes to Richard Rohr, visits Mormon stories again. We've talked about him like 2 or 3 episodes in a row now.
Okay,
Oh, is that so? Yeah.
That's probably where
We
we
just
got
had
that
Janice
too.
Spangler on, and she talked about him, and
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
yesterday's interview did too. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean,
those
like,
are realizations that come as you grow and as you develop as a human being, right? You look back on experiences and go, wow, that's where, where my ego.
Well,
kind
if
of
you're
took over.
awakening, it happens. That's
Yeah.
my,
Yeah.
insert there.
Yeah. So, not to say that I was, just a bald-faced, blatant liar, but certainly I did like to look good, right? And this is realizations that I look back on, but they're real. And I think it's important to realize that maybe sometimes when you're in a system with high expectations, when you don't quite meet those, at least maybe my personality certainly played a propensity to want to be a pleaser. I was number 2 in a family of 6 children. But my particular personality was certainly want to please, to not make waves, to be seen doing the right thing, even though maybe sometimes if I could get away with it, I might investigate something different and hope I didn't get seen or caught, or maybe say, the little white lie to get away with it. Right?
Wait, you were normal?
But I was normal. I think it's normal human development, right? But yeah.
Okay, so I'm assuming in terms of your family practice, your family's practice of Mormonism, there's always the scripture study, the family prayer, the family home evening, church attendance every week. Like those are some of the standards that families strive for.
Yeah.
What was your family's level of orthodoxy, and what was your family's religious practice?
Yeah, I would say quite orthodox, although, we really struggled, in my parents' home with a consistent scripture study. There are times where we would try and we'd push real hard early mornings, getting ready for school. We'd read from the Book of Mormon primarily. It wasn't consistent in that regard, but we typically would definitely have a family night, a family home evening kind of. That was quite consistent throughout my growing up. After my paternal grandfather passed away, I was probably 3 years old, but a few years following that, my grandmother, Marion, she went on a mission as a senior sister, but a high level of orthodoxy, I would say. I think we, as a family, identified as a family that was trying to do it right. And, as a teenager,
You said your dad was bishop at some
my
point.
dad served as bishop during the period of time when I was basically a teenager, probably from when I was 11 years old till I was 15, 16.
Okay, that's intense.
That certainly had its own little level of difficulty in a way, right? So that was kind of hard because, as a teenage boy and you're curious and interested in things, it was really hard to feel comfortable like I could approach my dad, who was the bishop, and be honest about some of those things, some of those issues.
So do you want to talk about you're kind of talking a bit about, as you would say, Elizabeth, kind of healthy normative exploration as
right.
a lesson. Do you want to talk about kind of what types of things?
Yeah, sure, I will. Yeah, let me just finish one thought, because just to kind of, I guess, show the family environment, the extended family environment. All of my dad's brothers, 5 of them, served as bishops at some point in time. One was a stake president. Later on, served as a mission president. So, during that period of time, so we're talking like early 90s, the mission farewell, when a missionary was going to leave, they would have a program basically that was dedicated to that missionary going on a mission, and they would speak, and maybe their family would participate in the program at sacrament meeting. And that was a big thing because I had a lot of older cousins, and we went to every one of those. We would travel up to Bear River City or to Cedar City. I mean, we would travel and go to those. And it was kind of a traditional thing that developed where all of the men in the family would go up and share a musical number of the elders of Israel, 4-part harmony, men's chorus kind of thing. But it was all of my cousins and my uncles, and so, yeah, it was a powerful family.
Kind of a priesthood
message.
Patriarchy legacy.
Absolutely, definitely. I would characterize it as that. So,
but in a seemingly positive way.
It felt very positive and very affirming and very powerful to me. Yeah. So as far as
and maybe some pressure.
Definitely some pressure. Yeah, I mean, a pressure to be part of it, pressure to fit into that, pressure to be what's expected. Yeah. So yeah, my teenage exploration into sexuality is probably like a very, very typical one. I remember it was actually when my older brother turned 12. He came home with this little pamphlet, from Boyd K. Packer, the little factories pamphlet you've talked about a little bit before, but it basically describes the idea of, the function of, of the body, of the testicles, of this whole puberty idea and what happens, nocturnal emissions, but then you certainly don't want to do things that would cause your body to ramp up its sexual function and desire. You wouldn't want to masturbate. I mean, it was all in code. It wasn't explicitly said. My brother left that little pamphlet laying around, so I would have been 10 years old, and I read that, and I was like, wow, that's so interesting, but what exactly does he mean? It was a matter of curiosity for me. I'm a very curious person. Really love to investigate things, and so that kind of, in a funny way, piqued my curiosity. I would say my exploration into sexuality was frustrating in a way, but it's not, I don't think it's very different than many people of my generation.
In the church,
but even outside, even to the point where parents, I think in general at that period of time, were apprehensive to speak openly and candidly to their children about issues of sex, sexuality, and sexual development. I remember I was probably 8 years old when I approached my parents first about the idea of where babies come from. And they were so embarrassed and so flustered that I vowed at that point that I probably would never ask them a question about that again. And that's not saying that it's probably very similar for almost, I don't know, I'm just guessing, but 80% of youth, maybe even more. Definitely within the church and probably even outside.
No way, I don't agree.
You think it was more?
Well, I think that when you're not in the church and you're not insulated in that way, I mean, certainly my parents didn't, have these conversations, but they didn't have to, because I found Hustler magazine, I found had friends that talked about things. So by the time I was 11, I knew,
I guess that's me speaking from my experience, right? Yeah. So coming at it from a whole different environment.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So, so I kind of investigated that on my own,
Pre-internet though.
Pre-internet, absolutely. So it was the Home Medical Journal. It was about this thick, that my parents had in the house. That's where I started my investigation, and certainly, I even had lessons as I grew a little bit older, 12, 14 years old, in priesthood classes, deacons and teachers quorum. They would use the word masturbation, and I was like, what does that even mean, right? So I discovered the act of that prior to knowing what the meaning of the word was.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean,
you were doing it before you even knew what you were doing, basically.
Yeah. So, and when I discovered it, that's what they mean, and that's sinful. Wow, I was like, oh crud! I've just thrown it all away out of curiosity, So And that was something that I didn't own up to or admit to until this interview when I was wanting to go on a mission. And, in a broader sense, that was kind of maybe the culture of my peer group, but also the ones, the young men that were older than me. It seemed like you kind of did your exploration as a teenager. Maybe it was in sexual activity, or maybe it was in even use of alcohol as, teenagers, which I didn't ever get into. That was something that didn't interest me, even though it was something that did happen amongst my peer group to a degree. But that you would experiment as a teenager in those kinds of things, and all the while knowing or thinking that eventually when you turned about 18, 19, you would approach the bishop and you would say, I want to go on a mission. And these are the things that I've done wrong. So you kind of created this laundry list in a way, and then you kind of offloaded it as you approached mission age, and you were ready to kind of like let those go. That's how it was for me. Now maybe for other peers, they were confessing, talking to the bishop about those issues all the way along, but that wasn't my experience. I kind of held it in and let it eat at me for years.
So was it just like a minor annoyance, or were you like perpetually racked with guilt and shame, or something in the middle?
Probably somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Maybe like kind of dissociate from it at times. There were times when certainly maybe youth standard nights or firesides where that subject would come up. Boy, why would I be racked with torment and shame and guilt? And, give me a couple weeks and I'd kind of be able to maybe get rid of that for a while and kind of offload it and not think about it until the next time around. So
just as a side note, I know the brethren sometimes listen to these episodes, or church headquarters does.
Yeah, right.
Religion, or Orthodox religions, have to find out a way to not teach their members to lie. Because in effect, and it's not their intent, they don't mean to do this.
Absolutely.
But in effect, you kind of started your interview kind of alluding to this, and that's what we've gotten to, is that there's this system where the expectations are literally almost impossible. And almost everybody falls short, and then almost everybody, but the guilt and the shame and the expectations are so high that everybody feels like they can't be honest about it. So the system creates a scenario where people learn to lie, and they learn to lie for multiple years. And you mentioned disassociate, which is basically live dual lives, where there's a private life and a public life.
Absolutely.
That's like the source of a huge percentage of emerging mental illness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When you have a private and a public life, and you're suppressing things and hiding things, and then learning to live with this constant discomfort of being out of sync in terms of your conscience, your integrity, your honesty, who you profess to be versus, how you think and feel inside.
Absolutely.
And we got to do better, because that's like every single person I've ever interviewed on Mormon Stories podcast, and we just got to fix that. So I'm just gonna
for certain, and so to that member of the Quorum of the 70 that's assigned to like listen to this, my heart goes out to you, whoever you are, brother, who's probably assigned to listen to these. It would be, I would expect that, right? So maybe hopefully, right? Yeah, can we
Who will lie to himself about how he feels? It's the disintegration that happens internally.
Yeah,
right? I mean, that's what you do.
Right, and that's where these systems can really be hurtful. Yeah,
shame cuts us off.
Yeah. So where our connection could be greater because we are honest, and sometimes that. Unfortunately, there's a wall that sometimes shows up, and I realize that part of that was my personality, to want to be a pleaser, right? To want to look right on the surface, and so, but I do think certainly some of that, the system itself creates that,
and there's some people that just like. They aren't honest and they lie but they aren't beat up about it. And then they repent and then they move on their life and like no harm, no foul.
Right.
And there's others like you that are kind of in the middle where it wasn't healthy, but it also wasn't tearing you apart and you got through it and maybe it reared its ugly head later. But I mean, and then there's people with like scrupulosity that are like literally suicidal and want to kill themselves because of it. And they're in the bishop's office every week and they can't stop. And it leads to like psychotic breaks.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want to pretend like everybody's affected the same way by the system. It just depends on the individual personality. Yeah. But it's a problem.
Definitely so. Yeah.
And it's almost every person I've ever interviewed. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was kind of the environment where I grew up in. But I would say, definitely an Orthodox family and definitely high expectations, but kind. I mean, wow, nice people, great people that helped and, I mean, showed up to help when it was needed, when push came to shove, I
mean, it's a solid upbringing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
An Orthodox Mormon upbringing when everything's working pretty well.
Definitely so. Definitely working pretty well. I mean, father was the breadwinner. Mom was stay at home. She, I remember even discussions, it was probably in the late 80s, I don't know when the talk was given, but the encouragement that mothers should be in the home. I remember those, we would go over, I grew up across the street from my grandmother. So, and she was just a really awesome, grandmother. It was a great situation to grow up in. I mean, I was over there, I'd mow her lawns, I'd maintain her, her lawnmower, and I'd fix little things in her house. And so it really was a Mormon upbringing where things really were working well.
Yeah.
And I look back on that with just feeling, appreciation and a feeling like it was a charmed upbringing.
Yeah. And that makes it so more fraught when there's a faith issue later, because some of us had just an amazing idyllic upbringing.
Yeah.
And that makes it more complicated. Let me ask you really quickly, what about your journey to have a testimony? There's always the kind of the Moroni 10:4 promise. And do I really know? Some people just think they always know. Others really want to try. And either they get some type of emotional feeling or they get the witness that they think they have. Did you have that type of journey at all or not?
Yeah, so that was part of it all the way along. I mean, certainly feeling the encouragement to read the Book of Mormon, to engage in the idea of Moroni's promise. And I when I was a teenager, high school, I really didn't care for reading much. I struggled to read. I mean, I can count on one hand the novels that I read in high school, even though there were more than that were required.
Yeah, me too.
So it really wasn't my thing to read, but I certainly, 16, 17, I took it more serious. There was a streak here and there where I really was striving hard to read the Book of Mormon on a consistent basis. I tell you, I really, at that time in my life, I got into, General Conference was a time my parents at least listened on the radio. Sunday was what we watched it on the television, KSL broadcast, Channel 5, so, we certainly watched the Sunday sessions, always did our best to make it to the priesthood sessions that were broadcast at the Ward building in town. If we were out, General Conference came in the fall, we were sometimes out, it was the deer hunt sometimes, which was a big family tradition. My uncles and cousins would come down, but definitely we came back for the priesthood session Saturday night. We were always sure, unless there was something crazy going on, we were there. Or in the spring, we were working with cattle and stuff, and we may have been busy, but we always did our darndest to make it into priesthood session. So, but at 16, 17 years old, Boyd K. Packer, of all people, as I look back, of course, now, kind of interesting, but I really... he talked about the study of doctrine will change behavior better than the study of behavior will change behavior. I remember when I first heard that talk from him, I don't know, 92 or something, I'm just guessing. But that really struck me, and I was like, wow. So that means if I'm concerned about behavior that I've got, if I'm worried about this, occasional dabble into, masturbation or my desire to look at the hidden Victoria's Secret catalog, stashed away, my pornography, I guess. But I was like, wow. So what I need to do is I need to study doctrine. I need to understand the doctrine, and that'll help me change that behavior. Elder Uchtdorf was another one. I mean, at that point in time, 16 years old, I was interested in flying. I loved the idea of being a pilot. That was what I was looking into. I wanted to be. So, of course, Elder Packer, having been a pilot in World War II, Elder Uchtdorf, having worked as a professional pilot with the airlines before.
So this would have been before Uchtdorf was an apostle?
It was. I think he was a member of the 70, but he seemed to talk on a very consistent basis.
I think Monson liked him.
I don't know, maybe it may not have been every conference at that point, but it was at least maybe every other one. I remember, wow. Silver Fox, look at him. Wow, it's amazing. So, and of course, he had a propensity to talk about his experiences of flying. Every pilot does. You know how you notice if there's a pilot at a party that you're at?
Oh.
Don't worry, they'll tell you. So,
but I'm bummed.
Yes, exactly. But so that for me, it was it wasn't necessarily a single experience where I was like, the Book of Mormon is true. For me, and this goes through all my life, it was a matter of practicality. I remember actually on a podcast you did with Margie a long time ago, she talked about this idea of a testimony from the life well lived. Mm-hmm. That's, I would say, probably the best way to explain how I felt about my testimony, how I gained my testimony. It was that feeling of a life well lived and a purpose behind it that helped me to feel like it was true. So I remember several experiences of feeling that kind of connection, kind of an inspired purpose beyond myself. And I felt like that was the Spirit inspiring me and letting me know that it was true.
Okay.
So
any other things about kind of your adolescence pre-mission that your family, your story that ends up playing in later that you want to make sure and mention before we go to your mission and post-mission?
No, I don't really think so. I was able to do 1 year of college before I left on my mission. Maybe just one thing worth mentioning was took a biology class. It included, it included the fossil record. It included Lucy. It included, prehistoric man. And it was taught by an adjunct professor. I went to UVSC at the time. It's Utah Valley University now. He was a BYU, not a BYU professor, but he had gone to BYU, right? So he's a graduate from BYU, and he taught there as an adjunct professor. And he's speaking of these things about, evolution and the fossil record. And I remember being troubled a bit by that. I found in the library Reflections of a Scientist, Henry Eyring. And I remember reading that, and I felt a little bit more comfortable and okay with this concept of the earth being older than 6,000 years. The fact that it could be okay that there's a fossil record that goes millions of years back, and that included humanoids, that sapiens, So, and I remember having a discussion when I went home on a weekend with my parents. So my dad being a science teacher, right? He was a science teacher in the high school. And so I asked him about that. My dad fell on the side of that evolution was a system that God used in his process. And that, time, how time is reckoned in the scriptures could certainly be different than how it's reckoned, on the way we measure it. That was part of the way it worked for him. He shared that with me. I remember it was actually kind of a source of epistemology or epistemological divide between my mom and my dad. She was more inclined, and still is to this day, more inclined to be more 6,000-year-old earth, the Garden of Eden, created from the dust of the earth. Man showed up then. Where my dad is more inclined to be more to give the respect and acknowledgement to the fossil record, but seeing it as a process that God used to establish mankind on the earth.
Can I share something?
Sure.
Real quick?
Go right ahead.
I'm remembering now that book. So one of my early questions sitting in his office as bishop, as I sit in there and I'm like, how am I supposed to reconcile everything I know about science with this stuff? As I'm really trying to believe this stuff. And he gave me that book. It was so not helpful.
Irene's book?
Yeah.
So this isn't Henry B. Eyring.
No, it's not Henry B. It's his father.
Yeah.
Wasn't he a chemist?
A physicist, I thought.
Physicist, okay.
Taught at Princeton.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So he was there with, I think, even with Einstein for a while. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was would you say that was a crack or something to put on your shelf?
I wouldn't even say that, because I think I came away with that with the being very comfortable with the concept of basically the same way that my father thought about the system. I was okay with it was just a system God used. It's not a big deal. I felt really comfortable with that. And, in the book, Henry B. Eyring kind of was like, I talked to, not Henry B. Eyring, Henry Eyring. So he spoke of the fact that, of course, I believe that mankind can develop and help aid in the development of biological systems and changes. Otherwise, how would God be able to do it? Mm-hmm. I'm kind of paraphrasing from memory, but basically that as mankind's wisdom and knowledge increases, that's becoming more like God, right? That is the plan. That is the path.
That's our shtick.
So of course it's going to, it stands to reason that we will get there too, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't even think it was a crack for me. I think it was just, it was an adventure into seeing something in a different way, but coming away okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fun. So mission, is that next? Or?
Yeah, I think mission's next. I can't.
We don't have to. We can go into as much or little as you want. Or
yeah, no, I think mission was really good. Great formative experience. I got called to New York South. So that was 90. I left in May of 95. Finished my year at UVSC. I got my private pilot certificate before I finished that year, and was really just enjoying life and was so excited about becoming a missionary. So Cantonese speaking though, and I was like, whoa, what's Cantonese? But it's a dialect of Chinese, spoken primarily in Hong Kong and southern China. So you've got the Canton province, but it's a very popular dialect. So went to the MTC and learned Cantonese, was there for 8 weeks, and went out to New York South. So New York South mission composed of Long Island, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and of all places, the island of Bermuda. So, but as a Cantonese speaker, we primarily stayed in Brooklyn and Queens. And New York North, which composed Manhattan, didn't have any Chinese-speaking missionaries. So we actually got to venture out across the Brooklyn Bridge to actually proselyte it and find. We were kind of authorized to do some of our finding and teaching in Manhattan as well. So
fun.
Yeah.
For a boy from what was the name of it? Tropic, Utah, to be hanging out in Brooklyn. That's intense.
Yeah, it was. Well, what an amazing experience. It really was such an incredible, eye-opening experience. Yeah.
So anything from your mission experience that will factor in later that, or was it a typical mission experience? Anything you want to mention?
Pretty typical, but just quickly. So, mission president was a businessman from Australia, John Walter Bailey. He developed or started a business similar to what you would see H&R Block. So income tax professionals, I think is what it was called, but it was an income tax preparation service kind of thing. He developed that company, did very well, was very successful. An amazing leader. Wow, was he an amazing leader. And he could really motivate missionaries. At the time when I arrived in the mission, he was a year and a half in to his 3-year stint there, maybe just a year in. And it's funny because the culture at the time when I arrived amongst the missionaries was that of, I remember first companionship meeting, with my new companion. He pulls what we called the White Bible. So it was the missionary guidebook, handbook. It was in a little white sleeve. That was kind of the White Bible. It was the rule book for missionaries. So he pulls that out of his pocket and he throws it across the room. And I go, whoa. He says, we don't follow that.
What? What?
And wow, like having just left the MTC, I was like, whoa, what did I just step into? So he explained it more, but the concept was that guidebook was the letter of the law. It was the law of Moses. But there's a higher law that we obey in the New York South Mission. And it's that we're led by the Spirit all the time. So if we're, for example, in the middle of a discussion with a family and we're feeling the Spirit and they're feeling the Spirit and feeling good and excited, and it's, let's say 10 o'clock at night, but things are good, the discussion's going well, we don't worry about that curfew time.
Whoa.
We keep teaching because the Spirit's there, right? So in a way, the rules were very gray, but it was motivated out of a real, like this motivation to really like move the work forward in this exciting way, right? So, now that like kind of different approach to rules, I think was something that was unique, and it really threw me for a loop for a while, but I embraced it after a while too. And, but it was rife with problems. I mean, you let young missionaries kind of roll with that idea. Yeah. It can get dicey quick, right? I mean, where they're justifying so many things.
And did that happen?
It did happen. Absolutely.
So scandals in the mission, or?
Yeah, but not really. As a Cantonese speaker, there was only 4 of us. And so we were in many respects kind of separated off from much of that maybe drama that existed outside in this bunch of Spanish-speaking missionaries.
Right,
English-speaking missionaries, we just didn't associate with them much.
So you won't have you had a few companions on your mission.
Yeah, very few.
Okay.
Yeah. I did serve with some English-speaking companions in Flushing, Queens for a while, so I did speak a little bit, get to teach in English as well, but I don't really, not familiar with too many scandals, but I know that there were some, and certainly was aware of a lot of abuse of the idea of the higher law,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we were a high performing mission. I mean, it was a kind of a competition between the East Coast, West Coast deal. I think it was the Arcadia mission in California and New York South. We kind of went back and forth as far as which mission was the highest baptizing mission in the United States at that time. really a real emphasis on
So it's your
baptism.
highest months. Do you know how many baptisms your mission?
300.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And do you think, in my mission, there were these really inappropriate baptism practices?
Absolutely.
Listen to episode 1 if you haven't heard, but like soccer baptisms,
Baseball
just bribery and manipulation.
Yeah.
Do you think that
was part of the environment for sure. I mean, you get people who want to achieve, who want to look good for this amazing leader, right? This incredible dynamic and leader. You want to impress him, right? So you're going to do what you can. And it happened, it was easier for the Spanish-speaking missionaries to really push the envelope. The Chinese culture is much more conservative and very careful, and more. So it was really kind of maybe more difficult for that to happen on the Chinese side of things. But we tried though. 1 month we had a goal as a mission to have 300 baptisms, and last day of the month, literally 11 p.m. The missionaries in the zone are out talking to people, approaching every person they can on the street. Hey, you want to listen to a message about Christ and his restored church? Bringing them into the word building and teaching 6 discussions in a period of 30 minutes. The baptismal font's full downstairs, right?
Yeah. I had that experience. I had that exact experience.
So let's go look at the baptismal font. You can do this right now, right? So don't let another minute pass without covenanting with God and showing him how you want to be obedient to his gospel.
Used car salesman,
right?
Nothing on you.
And I mean, it was excitement though. I mean, we were excited and we were like, wow, this goal and we can do this. I mean, my companion who was from Hong Kong at the time, we approached two young girls who were walking home from the subway station. They were Asian. They spoke Cantonese. We taught them, and we asked them if they wanted to be baptized. It's this night, the 11th hour, right? Last day of the month. And, they're like, well, maybe, but I think I probably should talk to my parents first, right? And we're like, yeah, you should get permission. But there was a pressure though from the zone leader, like, come on, just do it. Don't worry about. But I really felt like we needed to ask the parents. And my companion, having grown up in Hong Kong, felt that there was a need to respect the parents too. Here it was, I don't know, 11:30 now, right? And they live 3 or 4 blocks away. As zone leader's like, here, take our car, drive them home, ask their parents, we'll see you in 15 minutes. We'll be ready, right? Of course the parents say no. They were terrified when we show up on their front door with their daughters who they were expecting to be home an hour ago. And anyway, so we come back to the church. It was just me and my companion in the car. What happened? Mom and Dad said no, go figure. But we felt like we let some people down.
And the font was full, right?
The font was full and waiting. Yeah.
That type of experience is what almost wrecked my mission, is trying to process that with the mission president, where he was zealous and wanted, for us, it was every companionship getting a baptism in a month. So imagine 100 companionships. He wanted every companionship to have a baptism because we were 700 a month.
Okay, yeah.
But so for him, the goal was that every companionship have a baptism, and he sent out the APs last few days of the month, told us all to fill our baptismal fonts, and he sent the APs out to my area to find those 2 companionships that hadn't had a baptism yet. And that's what we did. We pressured vulnerable people to get baptized in the moment. And we did get the baptisms, but I felt filthy. I felt dirty. And then when I try to talk to my mission president about it, he yells at me and punishes me and ostracizes me because I'm questioning the priesthood authority. So I was on the other side of that where we got the baptisms and then I felt dirty.
You know? Well, I remember one other month though, I was the district leader for the Chinese district, all four of us. And it was another month. It wasn't this one, I don't believe, but we had baptized someone close to the end of the month. It was kind of like, it was two brothers. They were teenagers. They were just kind of open to whatever, right? And I remember handing, the paperwork, the slip that's filled out that you give to the ward leader so they can, input the information and get them processed. I remember handing those to the ward mission leader or the executive secretary. I can't remember which, and they're like, "Oh wow, oh you baptized someone," and we didn't, because when someone got baptized in that branch, in the Chinese branch, they really liked it to be a very social event. But we had done this at the 11th hour. Yeah, and the ward wasn't invited. Yeah, they weren't there. Yeah. And so they were like, "Oh wow, they got baptized." Yeah. And I remember my companion was like, "How come you gave them that paperwork? They're going to be mad at us now." Well, isn't that part of this? We're supposed to keep track of this, right? So, all of those hard things. Like I look back and go, "Wow, informed consent, did that mean anything then? I didn't even know what that word was." Yeah, of course. Right. Yeah. Hard, like, but it was a wonderful time. It felt amazing. It felt amazing. You're like absolutely. You think you're told the stories of the early Mormon missionaries going to Great Britain and baptizing 100 people in a day. And so you've got that lore in your mind. And so you want to just be that modern day miraculous missionary where people are converted in the moment by the thousands. And we even did street meetings. We'd take an old chair from the apartment, sit it out in the corner, and we'd jump up on it and we'd talk and talk. Yeah. Wow. So to compare this, I had a high school friend. We grew up together. We graduated together. We received our calls the same day. We were in the same MTC language class. He got called to Hong Kong. I got called to New York City. I don't think he actually was part of teaching someone that got baptized in his whole 2 years. Yeah. And I believe, if I remember right, I was part of teaching 31 people that got baptized. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, when someone leaves their home country and they come to a new environment, they're more open to new ideas. Mm-hmm. I think that played part of it. I saw it at that time, 2 Nephi chapter 2. All those that come into this land are brought here by the hand of God, and they know it. Uh-huh. And of course they would accept the gospel, right? Yeah. They know that they were brought here by the hand of God. Yeah. It's in the scriptures. Yeah. I turned to that all the time. I felt like really inspired by that.
What were all the other people brought by? All the other places in the world.
But you're feeling emotional, Matthew?
Well, yeah. It was powerful to me then. It was really something that I believed. Yeah. And, really, when you look at when I remember some of these people that we taught, one of the guys, I don't really know his full story, how he got to the U.S., but I think it was in a container, a still shipping container. And he left because he had nothing in China. So even the dive that he lived in, and the fact that he would go to the East River every day and fish for food, but he could go wherever he wanted and feel a freedom Yeah. I mean, of course I felt like he was brought here by God. So it was powerful. I mean, I would say my mission was I learned so much. I really did learn to accept diversity of people that I don't know if I would have, well, I certainly hadn't encountered it to that point in my life, but I think it was a great formative experience for me as I went into adulthood. And I think that's about it for my mission.
And when it's weird how your frame of reference matters, because back then it's all miraculous. Now we can even be horrified about issues of cultural imperialism or pressure or informed consent. And it's just amazing how perspective really colors things.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you just really quickly, my mission president, Gordon Romney, everyone felt like he was gunning for general authority.
Uh-huh.
When I got back from my mission, I felt like I had to tell on him to church headquarters because I felt like it was so corrupt what he was doing, even though from his framework, he was saving souls. And, but from my standpoint, it was corrupt. Did your mission president ever become a general authority later? Do you know if not, why? Or?
So I don't know, but what I am aware of is that I am aware of, so as he neared the end of I think he left to go home about a month after I did. So, May of 97? Well, they usually switch him out in, was it June or July, right? So it was that year of 97 when he was going home. What I did see, and he actually spoke to it in zone conferences, mission conferences, that it's time for us to start transitioning away from this higher law kind of idea of being more open to just moving by the Spirit instead of the law of Moses, which is included in the White Handbook. It's time for us to start moving back into the bounds.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke to it explicitly, right? That a new mission president's coming. I don't know what their system, their
Which
desire would be.
Do they live the lower law or the higher law?
Right. So he wanted us to kind of rein that idea in. I do think, I don't know this, I can only speculate maybe that there were probably some concerns. I do know after the fact, though, that if I understand correctly, a lot of the contemporaries of my mission really struggled when they returned home because they were so accustomed to laws, commandments being gray, that when they came back and they encountered leadership that was a lot more rigid, they butted heads, and I think there was such a large number that kind of stepped away from church activity as they returned home. It did not go unnoticed by church headquarters. In fact, I think they did even some interviewing. They from what I understand, they went out and wanted to get to the bottom of what was going on because it was disproportionate in the statistics. I do know, though, he was called to be temple president in Sydney.
Okay.
Afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think it would be worth doing a Mormon Stories episode or series on the influence of mission presidents on someone's life, because whether it's a father figure or like transforming and inspiring your life, or being super abusive and ruining your life, or everything in between, like the impact that a mission president can have on a young Mormon kid's life can be profound.
Yeah.
And, we even had my friend David Christian did a Mormon Stories interview where he served in Australia, and his mission president called several sister missionaries to be his plural wives while he was a mission president. And that happened in Australia.
Yeah.
And it can be an amazing, uplifting, healing experience depending on your mission president, or it can be like a life-destroying, traumatic disaster.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, Mormon Stories would not exist if I hadn't had a mission president like Gordon Romney, because it was such a wonderful and traumatic experience for me.
Right.
So it's just, it's a fertile topic for exploration, the impact of mission presidents on the lives of their missionaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, I mean, for me, I came away from that experience with nothing but a positive feeling toward him.
Yeah.
Toward the mission president.
And I still love President Romney, you know.
You know, and I don't know if you recall, but Mary Danzig, Otterstrom at the time.
Yeah.
We were in a zone together.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what else do you want to tell about I want to bring Elizabeth in, but what else do you want to tell about your story between your mission and maybe becoming bishop that's kind of really important to your transition, your journey?
Okay. Yeah. So, came home. I was kind of a slow mover when it came to the marriage thing. I got involved with, a performing group out of the Orem Institute of Religion. So the institute there at UVU, it's called Latter-day Celebration.
Yeah. I've seen them perform.
And although, you know, I was in high school choir, but certainly I'm not a soloist. I don't have enough confidence for that, but I can sing in a choir. Okay. But I really think I was selected for the group because I was a farm boy and the director knew I could drive a van with a trailer. But I don't know. Oh, and I was a good narrator when it came to playing the part of like Moroni or something in some of the productions. But I did that. That's where I met my former wife. She tried out my second year in the group. She tried out and was part of the group. I was dating someone else at the time, and that relationship didn't work out. So then we started dating. We went on our first date. I think it was on our spring tour in California, and that was, I think, April of 20, it would have been 99.
So wait, you almost married, though, the previous
we were
right? Like
basically engaged.
Temple.
Yeah. She was a BYU student. But we were married in July. So first date in April, married in July. Short dating, short courtship. I think by that time, I was kind of like, I need to find the safe, kind of check all the boxes mate and move on with my life, move and continue moving on along the path. Right. And she did, right. I mean, she was musical. She was a return missionary. She'd served a mission, was faithful from pioneer stock family. I mean, in their family, they have a ring from Jerusha, who was Hiram Smith's wife, right? I mean, that's some of the family heirlooms on that side of the family.
Plural wife, right?
Jerusha was
first wife.
First wife.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hiram's first wife.
Yeah, Hiram's first wife.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Because that matters, right?
Well, yeah. Well, it does matter, right? I mean, it's your Mormon heritage.
No, I meant what wife you are.
Oh, well, but Hiram didn't. If I remember, Hiram didn't want to have anything to do with the polygamy idea. But he was married once, and then his wife passed away, and then he got remarried. Right?
Okay.
I don't think he practiced polygamy in the sense that Joseph did.
Okay.
Check me on that, but I think that's the case.
Okay. My understanding is
I could be wrong,
but it's not important to this story.
Yeah,
listeners will let us know.
They'll let you know.
Listeners will let us know if Hiram was a polygamist.
Yeah.
I thought he was, but
Okay.
I'm probably wrong.
I could be too. So, but yeah, and as we got married, it was like we are the LDS power couple, right? I mean, mission president bound. We're going to be achievers in this system, right? And paradoxically, though, like when it came to children, like I know what the church expects. Have children. Don't wait, right? Don't wait for children. Don't worry about work. Don't let economics slow that down or stop that. When I'm honest with myself, I was really worried about having children right away, but felt the expectation from my wife and from the church. Don't be selfish here. Don't be selfish. This is where you step up to the plate and where you show that you're faithful to the teachings of the leaders of the church. And, we had our first child was born 10 months after we were married. So I don't, certainly don't regret any of my children being part of my life. But that was really a tough one where I went against what I really felt and felt unable to speak honestly about my concerns and fear. Yes, I wanted to have children, but right away, I wanted to maybe spend some time as a couple, right? And was concerned about what children, the responsibility that entails. So that was hard. I remember actually when I called my mom and told her that we were expecting a baby, and she could tell I was kind of emotional, right? And she's like, "Are you okay?" And I remember wanting so badly to say, "I'm really afraid. I'm scared that I'm not ready." I mean, every father probably feels that way, right? But really feeling like, wow, this came way faster than I wanted it to, that I'm ready for. And instead, here comes the white lie, right? Here comes where I'm intellectually dishonest and I say, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just really happy." I mean, of course there was a level of happiness, but also I didn't speak the fullness of my feelings because I felt like it was opposing the teachings of the church.
And I just also want to ask, obviously the marriage didn't end up working out.
Correct. Yeah.
Some marriages survive, some don't. Some marriages after a faith crisis survive and some don't.
Right.
I no longer have the policy that all marriages should, or I no longer have the perspective that all marriages should survive. Sometimes divorce is a success, not a failure.
Yeah.
So, but I now see you guys, holding hands and really nurturing each other. I've known you both long enough to get the sense that you are engaged in a relationship where you kind of perceive each other to be soulmates, and we'll get to that, or just really emotionally intimate with each other. You once you see that. Oh, let me back up. So there's this kind of traditional Mormon saying that we all heard that any two faithful Mormons can make it work.
Absolutely.
If they're both committed to the gospel.
Right.
And so you get married really quickly because, like you said, if you check the boxes, then they check all the boxes, we can make it work. And so you end up getting engaged really short, getting married really quickly, having kids relatively quickly. But whether or not there was fundamental emotional compatibility, sexual compatibility, a really good fit in terms of a relational fit, it's kind of a crapshoot. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, so I often say a faith crisis reveals a marriage more than it does destroy a marriage or ruin a marriage. I guess, the question that came to my mind is like, how well were you even able to get to know each other, and how much compatibility really was there? You kind of just launch yourself into it, and you hope that there's compatibility. but you don't need, compatibility isn't really on the table other than like, am I attracted to them? Do they meet the check boxes? Are they willing to do it? And then you just do it. But you don't actually get the chance to assess for emotional, sexual, psychological compatibility. And I'm just wondering if you have any, that's not really a question, but I'm wondering if that's anything that's something you want to even discuss.
Yeah, it certainly is part of it. And I think what came to my mind as you were speaking was you create the compatibility.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking my own personality, right?
Yeah.
Is that I'll just be compatible, right?
Right.
And is that, when push comes to shove, when things come down later in life, when I came to the point of wanting to be brutally honest with myself and start being honest with my companion, yeah, right. That's where more time in courtship would have been important, right? Where compatibility maybe should have been assessed more deeply, other than we fit into the system and we won't both want to be achievers within this system.
I feel like what you're describing is this sort of extrinsically placed on you compatibility. Like the way you described that was, I know you well enough to know that you're a master at people pleasing. You're the master at selling yourself so short, but still making it look as though, you're authentically on board. So I think what you described when you said you make the compatibility, it sounded to me like he's describing this. It's this external, it's lipstick and rouge, it's the mirage that you create. We are compatible, but any of the intrinsic, any of the real raw soul material is just devoid. It's like, I could be wrong. That's just the conceptual image that I'm getting of how can you create compatibility?
Yeah, right. Well, agreed. That's one of the failings. It's certainly a reason why we're no longer married when it all comes down to it, right?
What do you mean?
What I mean is, when my faith crumbles and that extrinsic system disintegrates, then where is the relationship now, right? It could be there for some people, and for some people it's not. And that's where it, and where it's really hard is that now you've got 6 kids.
Yeah.
That's a kind of compatibility, though, that is intrinsic, It's like pieces of a puzzle that fit together. You can't force them into place. And
yeah.
It's hard, though.
So, yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So thanks for that vulnerability. And what I heard you saying, I heard something maybe similar or parallel, is just like in your adolescence, you learn to have the private and the public life. You learn to say whatever needs to be said to please, to look as though everything's fine. Mm-hmm. That carries into your marriage, where your job is to externally conform or fit or do whatever you can so that the marriage is successful and so that your family is successful.
Absolutely.
Whether or not you want to get married quickly or have kids quickly or whatever, whether even you're a great fit, you're going to make it work because that's how it, and then you'll deal with the emotional turmoil however you deal with it.
Right.
But that's something you got to figure out, because not conforming isn't a possibility.
Correct.
And if that ends up becoming toxic or unsustainable over time, we'll see.
We'll see, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely. You characterized that correctly. I would agree with what you said.
We'll see if it works out, or does it blow up and explode in a really unpleasant way for everybody? Because over time, how long can you pack it down and pack it down and pack it down and contort and twist to fit whatever the external expectations are?
Yeah.
You know, how long is that sustainable before you or the system falls apart and breaks?
Something
right?
breaks, right? Something's probably going to break. Yeah. I think that's a great characterization. So, I mean, just let's kind of move things along in a way, I guess, to say that, so we move around a fair amount. I get hired basically right out of college to fly for SkyWest Airlines. I move through the ranks of co-pilot, then to captain. We move around to several, live in California for a while, come back here to Utah, move out to Colorado, fly out of Denver for a while. Most of the time, usually involved in young men somewhere, right? So in young men's presidencies, although that was kind of difficult with my schedule because I could either be there on Sunday or I could be there on Wednesday for the Wednesday activities, but it was hard for me to, with an airline schedule to be there for both. So that was kind of tough. Then kind of got, after 11 years of flying for an airline with the schedule of being gone 4 to 5 days a week, was looking for something different, and felt like my kids were growing up without me around much. And so an opportunity came up to start a business keeping honeybees, and my brother had got me interested in that, and that came up, and so we moved to Moses Lake, Washington. Moses Lake is a town that's probably 30% Mormon LDS. It's a very strong community, farming community. A lot of Mormons from Utah moved up there with the when they built the dam, 50s, 60s, and started farming. And but anyway, I continued to fly for a while, operating a beekeeping operation on the side. Continued to fly, and all the while having kids every couple of years. And I was served as an elders quorum president in Moses Lake. Really loved that calling. What was really amazing about that group of men that I got to associate with was they were probably the most real, down-to-earth, and honest people I had the chance to associate with within the church, outside of maybe my growing up years. And I would even credit that to one man who's still a good friend of mine, who was grew up in a Mormon family but didn't join the church until he was an adult. But he was honest. What he wore on his sleeve. And he, because of his honesty, encouraged that whole group of men to open up in a way that I hadn't seen before. And that was an amazing experience. Really awesome to be part of that. Served there for a few years, and then we moved again to Yakima to transition into ownership of a larger beekeeping operation, which is what I own now and what I operate now. And we had, by that time, we'd had all 6 kids at that point. We had 5 of them basically 2 years apart on down the line, and then the little caboose, she came 7 years after number 5. So she was born there in Yakima, 2015.
As I reflect on the outline that you put together in preparation for this interview, there's at least one dynamic that I want to explore really quickly.
Yeah.
You talk about, as a young men's leader and as a leader in the church, battling kind of with, masturbation and stuff as a faithful church leader.
Yeah,
and
right.
this is something that doesn't get discussed because we always talk about the youth being put through heck or hell, tormented by their bishop. But, the same young men's leaders in Mormonism that are preaching to the youth about masturbation are probably and almost always masturbating themselves. And I've interviewed a few bishops, including Sam Young, who almost every bishop I've ever interviewed who served as a Mormon bishop admits that they were simultaneously potentially questioning youth about masturbating, and they were masturbating themselves as bishops.
Yeah.
So this was something that you had to think about as someone who was Elders Quorum president and then Young Men's president, and kind of rising in the ranks of this is something you were confronting yourself. Is that right? Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, sure. So to back up just a little bit. So there was certainly something that was part of my life and behavior as a teenager. As a missionary, I white knuckled through the whole mission experience. Fear of if I did, I'd get sent home. Fast forward to when I was serving as bishop and the mission president in a bishop leadership meeting saying 70% of the missionaries here in our mission struggle with masturbation. And I was like, what? Well, then anyway, not to get off track here, but the question for me then was like, well, then why are we asking the question of them before they go on the mission?
Yeah, we'll get back to that.
But we'll get back to that, right? So, the period between marriage, getting married and serving as a young men's, leader in different, presidencies, it was something that was part of my behavior. Typically when I was on the road flying, and it was, I kept it hidden. Certainly wasn't going to admit to that behavior to my wife. It's definitely something I was scared to do. And also was not ready to admit that to a bishop in temple recommend interviews or whatever. I was called to be, they had organized a new ward. This was when we were living in Utah. One of the times they had organized a new ward, and I was called to serve as young men's president. And just by turn of events and where I was in my life, I was wanting to be more honest and wanting to kind of clear up this, weight, the rocks that I'd put in my backpack, to speak to a common Mormon meme, right? I was like, I can't be a young men's president and have this hanging over me. So I went to the just barely called bishop, right? I mean, he was trying to organize all the auxiliaries and everything in a period of 2 weeks or something, and after having accepted the call, called him back and said, we need to talk. And I told him what was going on, and he rescinded the call to be young men's president, feeling like it would be better for me to work through this repentance process and not have that calling. And I was okay with that at the time. I felt quite embarrassed. Of course, it hadn't been announced publicly or anything at that point in time. Went home from that interview and told my wife that I'm not going to be called to young men's president today, which was the plan. And of course, that was really difficult for her and for me. That was a difficult, I guess maybe out of the blue surprise. That was hard. And we slowly kind of worked through that. And, from then forward, although there was maybe some occasions where I, engaged in that kind of behavior, I felt a lot more pressure to not do that anymore, because, how many more times do I want to go through that shameful kind of process? Feeling like I needed to just be better. And, but yeah, it's a part of human behavior that is more ubiquitous, I guess, more common than even leaders in the church, I think, in many respects, want to be truthful about, especially when it comes to their own behavior. Certainly as an elders quorum, when I was elders quorum president, there was a lot of pressure not to do that. Of course, not wanting to be hypocritical, not wanting to be a hypocrite. Definitely during the time as bishop, that pressure existed. In fact, and other factors played into it as well. But I was so tired and so exhausted. When I was a bishop, I was running a business, family, kids, 20 to 30 hours a week in the duties of a bishop. I mean, I would say in many respects, I was so tired that I didn't have interest in that during the period of time I was a bishop. But that's not to say that I didn't have the evil thought or maybe even engage in some level of self-stimulation. But that's it's a hard thing for people to be honest with and about. And I think we can do better. I think the church can do better. I think we can be more human and still be considered by the rules worthy.
Well, you kind of mentioned the idea of just not asking the question anymore, because if it's not as ubiquitous as sleep and water and food.
Right.
But I mean, if you go like one level up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's certainly right above that. Absolutely. So, I mean, if it's as ubiquitous as 90% for men is the percent that I have, if it's that ubiquitous, why are we ever asking the question at all? I think that's what you made me wonder.
Yeah, and so I mean, kind of jumping forward, but it's pertinent to the discussion right now, is that as I was bishop and when I was called in 2015, like one of the things that, as I looked in, doing interviews with youth, knowing my own experience, even though it was maybe off script, so to speak, I'm jumping into the higher law, right? I learned how to do that on my mission. Being led by the Spirit, whatever you want to call it. My feeling was, unless a young person brings it up to me, I'm not going to push into it. And even though maybe as I'm doing the temple recommend interview to go do baptisms for the youth at the temple, and I'm pretty certain, based off of body language, I mean, our brains are so amazing at catching small little things and knowing when deception might be at play. Even if I thought that they're not being truthful about, do you obey the law of chastity? I wasn't going to press in. If they said, yes, I do, even if I felt like every bit of body language was saying, no, I don't, I wasn't going to go further. Mm-hmm. I felt like it wasn't my place. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I landed as far as pushing into those issues as bishop.
What about with adults? Did you ask adults? I know you didn't ask me. That's another weird thing that would have been a deal breaker for me.
Yeah. With adults, it was the same thing. Unless they wanted to push in to the subject. And again, even in that Temple Recommend interview where I asked the question, do you obey the law of chastity? Even if body language might have suggested otherwise, I didn't ask more. Yeah. If they said, yes, I do, let's go on to the next question.
And one thing this highlights for me is another problem that I'm just going to highlight, which is the variability of what we often call bishop roulette, Mormon bishop roulette, or ecclesiastical roulette, because you'll get bishops on one super liberal or progressive end of the spectrum that just never want to talk about it ever, and it's just a non-issue, and you can go to the temple or pass the sacrament or go on a mission if you masturbate, and they don't even want to know.
Yeah, right.
And then you're slightly to the right of that, which is like, well, we'll talk about it if you bring it up, but I'm certainly not going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Then you'll swing all the way to the other side. When I was in Logan, during the years I was excommunicated, we had a bishop who would ask every single youth, do you masturbate? And this bishop asked my oldest child, who was assigned, the gender of female at birth, do you masturbate? So this is my 17, 18-year-old daughter. She's graduating from seminary.
Yeah.
And she's got this 35-year-old man alone with her in a room asking her proactively if she masturbates, because he's got to ask every youth, because he's found that there are youth who do that. And so you've got to ask everybody, and then everybody's put on a worthiness plan or a repentance plan, and you're treating it like, and you're not allowed to go on a mission, or your mission's delayed, or you're not allowed to get married, or your wedding is delayed, or you can't pass the sacrament, and it becomes this very visible thing. Yeah. And you're shamed in front of your siblings and your parents and your friends and the ward members. Why isn't Johnny passing the sacrament? Why isn't Johnny blessing the sacrament? Oh, there must be why was his mission delayed? Why was their wedding delayed? Why couldn't he go to BYU? Like there's this variability of what a bishop chooses to enforce that can literally drive some kids to suicidal ideation, or even deaths by suicide attempts, or even death by suicide if you get the wrong bishop. Yeah. And so that's why I bring this up almost every interview, because it's such a plague and such a potentially deadly game that gets played just randomly by which bishop you happen to get. And if you get the wrong bishop, your life can be ruined, literally.
Right. So there is kind of an interesting kind of set of, maybe you could call it a double standard, if you will, because it seems as though the emphasis on those 6-month interviews with youth, I mean, granted, in June, it'll be 2 years since I've been released as bishop. But I still I think it's the same, and I could be wrong. But there wasn't as much an emphasis on those, 6-month interviews with youth to look into that. I didn't feel, but the high standard that is investigated for missionary candidates is delving into those details deeper. And that's where maybe it can become even more, hurtful, in that all of a sudden now in fact, the script for those questions for missionary candidates, for potential missionaries, I mean, it's scripted what we are to ask, and it is more explicit. It's, what kind of experiences have you had with other people in the sexual realm? How often? What are the details? So yes, that was born out of the idea of raising the bar, right? We remember that slogan of raising the bar for missionary service. It was the intent, I think, was no longer, is it okay for you to rack up a bunch of sins, quote unquote sins, as a teenager and come to your bishop and spill it all out on his desk pre-mission, and then be able to go out and serve.
Like you guys kind of did.
Like we kind of did. Yeah. Whoa, go figure, right? Like was kind of the custom.
Yeah.
So, but it was certainly, those questions came from that, of like, we're going to delve into it deep here as you prepare to be a missionary. And,
That's pretty unfair, because you don't ask them when they're youth or younger, and you don't ask, and then all of a sudden you drop it on them.
At least I didn't ask, but I certainly did. I was proactively educating them that these are the questions you can expect when it is mission time, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like, certainly I know some youth who their missionary service was delayed. And again, it was partly in the matter of leadership roulette. And I was always, again, when the mission president, the certain acting mission president in Yakima was like, 70% of our missionaries masturbate consistently. I was like, whoa. So later I asked the mission president, the stake president, why are we asking the question when it is the fact that they are engaging in this as missionaries? And it's okay. And I think it should be okay. I'm certainly not pushing back against the idea that they should continue to serve, but I am pushing back against this kind of standard that then is not a standard, but then it's gray, but then,
what did he say?
He said, I'm trying to remember what he said. Well, it's a matter of making sure they have enough willpower to manage themselves. And I was like, well, so what bar do they have to meet of not engaging in porn or masturbation before we can move forward? Well, let's say they put a month together, and then they maybe do it once. And then maybe they're able to do another month. So really you're looking at almost 2 months without nothing. So that's getting there. And there is no written standard, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
part of the problem.
That's part of the problem.
Yeah. But I think the bigger point is talking about this at all is the problem.
Yeah, there shouldn't be a written standard about what.
There shouldn't be
it should just be
just
like,
let it go.
well, this is normal human behavior. You do it in the womb. You do it as, as a child.
Yeah.
And
the more you talk about it, and the more you stigmatize it, the more you encourage the behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the biggest thing, is that we're probably in the 98th percentile of humans masturbating and looking at pornography as Mormons, just because we start talking about it so young and we prohibit it. And of course we know psychologically, as soon as you tell a kid or a youth not to do something, they want to do it more. So that's why, Utah in some surveys leads the nation in pornography use.
Yeah,
because we groom it as Mormons from childhood.
We put it in a container that we can't let go of.
And also one more thing about that is just the scary sort of alternative that can happen, instead of, you can develop some pretty unhealthy alternative behaviors trying to not do this thing. You do this other thing that is damaging and unhealthy. I think a lot of good kids end up doing that.
Like assault, or because you don't have a natural release?
Or even like this sort of neurotic, I'm going to bring myself to almost climaxing, over and over again. And I mean, I don't know what that does to somebody, but it's an unhealthy coping mechanism. But yeah, then on the more egregious end of the scale is, assault. You're expressing your curiosity in ways inappropriately with other beings because, heaven forbid. I don't know. All I know is that it's dysfunctional and unhealthy, and it's not right, and it seems obvious, but yet it perpetuates in this insane way.
Yeah. So anything else you want to share, Matthew, about kind of your life prior to becoming called as bishop, your marriage, your life, your anything? Then we'll switch over to Elizabeth's story, and then we'll come back to kind of your journey as a bishop.
No, I don't think so. I think we've probably hit some the high points. Maybe if I remember something else, maybe we'll jump back. But I think that's, I guess it's really important to say that when I served on the Stake High Council prior to being called as bishop. One interesting, just quick tidbit was I remember a high council meeting where we discussed the excommunication of Kate Kelly. And that was interesting, but didn't really throw me for a loop at the point. I was kind of towing the line pretty well then. So, but it was maybe just a slight little opening into what could be called a feminist awakening. Mm-hmm. And we'll get more, and that happened even more in my service as a bishop, so we can get into that later. The other fact too.
Go ahead.
The other fact I think to mention is that, when I was called as bishop, I was working into the ownership of this bee operation. It's a big. We employ 23 people. It's the largest bee operation in the Northwest, and it's a lot of work. So, and this just highlights my dedication to what I felt my responsibilities were with the church. There were often times where I would go from a high council meeting that went late into the night, maybe 9:30 or 10. I'd go out to my bee truck that has a sleeper on it, change out of my suit and tie, and go and move bees all night long, come home at 3 or 4 in the morning. And then I felt the responsibility to wake up at 7 and be either at work or be with my kids. And that was not healthy. But I felt it was the call, right? It was I'm showing that I'm dedicated. I'm being dedicated to the work of God. I would run from meeting to meeting, changing clothes from my work clothes to my suit. Often. Maybe as we get into my service as bishop and the calling of a new stake president, there would be another example of how that dedication played into it. But I think and even when I was called as bishop, talking with the stake president, a wonderful man that I just love, I said, my only apprehension is I have a lot on my plate right now. I mean, we were basically 6 months from taking over full ownership of the operation. I was very busy, feeling very overwhelmed, and then being called to be the bishop. I said my apprehension is, I don't know if this is the right time for me, because I am so busy. And his response was, and I accepted it wholeheartedly, put your shoulder to the wheel, right? I mean, his response was, it's God's time. He wants you there. And my response was, okay, I'll be there. So that's my approach to my service as a bishop, was to be there wholeheartedly. I mean, of course, we always hear, and maybe I did it wrong. I can admit that I probably applied this incorrectly, but there is the encouragement, continue to date your wife. Your family is the most important thing. You need to prioritize them, even though you're the bishop. They are the priority. I think that's true, but however, in practice, how do you do that? I mean, how do you really? How do you really do that?
It's not humanly possible. I mean, I was coming to church for a very short time and having made my own changes out of my stressful job and trying to embrace health and well-being and for mental health. And I remember asking you, just because I could observe, and out of curiosity, but compassion as well, how do you guys do this all? And I ended up coming to a bishop's meeting, whatever you guys called them, but my intention was to bring to them some wellness tips. Like, how do I do this without saying what I think you all are doing is insane? It's unhealthy. It's unhealthy for you. It's unhealthy for your family. But really, you have got to figure out that your mental health, your well-being is important. All these men, they're not educated about how to be a counselor. They're being therapists. The things that they're experiencing secondhand trauma. I mean, that was evident to me. Wow. And then here, like, he's still clearly carrying so much guilt and the weight of maybe I did it wrong, and all of these things are so heavy and to use the word unfair, because there's really nothing about life that's fair. But it kills me. It hurts to see, and it makes me angry that it's just going on uncontained, encouraged. It just continues on.
Yeah. But at the time, it was
because you'll be blessed.
This is your calling, right?
You'll be rewarded.
Put your shoulder to the wheel, press along, right? I mean, we all have work. Let no one shirk. Put your shoulder to the wheel. And I felt like it was my purpose. I certainly found purpose in it. I'm not saying it was done with an open heart and not begrudgingly at all. It's only in the reflection of that time period that I see where it really damaged me.
How so?
Well, I mean, Elizabeth mentioned this kind of idea of, secondhand kind of trauma with some of the issues that where I was needed to help with members of the ward. It's a matter of psychological health, not taking time for myself and my own well-being, not taking time to enjoy the period of life with my family in the way that in retrospect I wish I would have done. I struggled to maintain healthy boundaries during that period of time because I felt like it was the work and will of God that I do what I was doing for the benefit of my brothers and sisters who needed me to be there with my own particular talents and abilities to serve them. So, yeah, it was it was both, right? I mean, I recognize the harmful things much easier in retrospect. I didn't really recognize that in the moment, only feeling like something or many things even were not quite right, but it's like you're an act on the stage trying to juggle, and you're going to keep trying, even though you're quite certain that one of these balls will fall. But you just keep trying, right? God will help you find a way. So I found, in the moment, I found joy in that moving from thing to thing to thing. I found energy in feeling that, in feeling needed, and in feeling like I did a good job, right? That I was helping people. And I can still find joy in that because I really do feel like I helped a lot of people. So,
but at what cost?
At what cost, right? Well, Depends on who you talk to, I guess, right?
So talking about marriage is always difficult because there were times in my marriage with Margie where I'm like, it's not healthy that we're married, or where I was just so unhappy and she was unhappy and we were struggling, where you could have, if at certain points in the marriage, I would have said, we shouldn't have ever been married. It's not good for the kids that we are married. And now we both look back and say, we're so glad we're together. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, looking back on a marriage is always difficult, but
Yeah.
as you think about what we haven't talked about is how your marriage progressed up until the point you became bishop, other than I get a sense that this was a lot of strain to add to your life in addition to whatever strains you were experiencing. But do you want to give an update on how just a brief update on how your marriage progressed up until the point where you were called as bishop? Was it living parallel lives? Was it a deep romantic, soulmate friendship? Was it a contractual thing? How is it, or do you even want to try and capture?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there were times when I think you could probably say that all of those things that you just mentioned were present, right? But I think probably the overarching theme was a relationship of primarily driven by utility within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Meaning we did our best to do what was expected within the church. That was part of the unspoken marital contract, if you want to say. And achievement within that community and in that framework was definitely tops on the list. And it was a motivator behind and probably everything else, right? I mean, the idea of eternal families. Well, let's try and make our family the happiest and the best it can be here because we're going to be with each other for eternity. We didn't really have huge conflicts. In fact, I think probably for our children, except for maybe the exception of the oldest, might have noticed some cracks starting to form. Going down the road, but when I told them we were going to be divorced, complete shock to them because there was nothing on the surface that appeared to be amiss. And that was partly because I felt the need to portray the image, to maybe let things go that I felt were important, just to let them go at the sake of maintaining the relationship in the way that it felt like it needed to be, right? That it needed to be happy, that we needed to be a happy, full family that was trying to do what was right according to the standards of the church. So we were good business partners, right? I mean, especially as we started the business and then we moved into ownership of the new business.
Oh, literally business partners.
Well, yeah. I mean, she ran the office and I was out, kind of running the operations of the crew and all that kind of thing. So, but literally business
with 6 kids.
Yeah, literally business partners, but also conceptually in many respects. That's kind of what it became. Especially as church callings, added on to, became a very, very like not that in some respects it was separate lives, and that she was primarily focused on caring for the kids and making sure that their lives were cared for, and I was focused on the business and my callings, and so, but. I would say that the romantic side, the courtship side, definitely as the service as bishop declined significantly, and it became more of a relationship of what was expected, what was convenient, and a business type relationship. The emotional intimacy declined significantly.
When you were called?
Well, it had started, yeah, for sure. And then, of course, as my service continued, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I mean, I think that to be gracious, I think she tried her very best to do what she felt was expected in her position as a mother, as a supporter of the priesthood holder, right? I think she was trying her best, that she knew how. And I certainly was not of any help in maybe helping her to see how she could do it differently that might be more supportive. That's on me, right? That's my responsibility for not speaking up, maybe. So we certainly could have benefited from some counseling that we didn't really get. But yeah, so that's probably up to the point of being called as bishop and maybe into the service as bishop a little bit. The relationship dynamics that I would like to share.
All right. Well, we've done 2 hours. I feel like we should have a break.
Wow.
But you guys, this has been brilliant and beautiful so far. Thanks for being so vulnerable, Matthew. Thanks for your input, Elizabeth. And we'll end this portion of the interview. We'll take a quick break and then we'll come right back. And maybe Elizabeth will hear your story up until you meet Bishop Shakespeare.
Yeah, right.
And then we'll talk about Bishop Shakespeare's faith crisis as bishop, meeting Elizabeth,
right?
How your relationship develops while you're bishop, and then how that leads to you stepping down as bishop and the marriage not surviving, the beautiful relationship you guys have developed since then, and your faith journeys.
Yeah.
So that's all
to come.
That's all to come.
Wow.
That sound all right?
Sounds epic. Yes, that sounds
All right.
fabulous. Thank you.
All right, everyone. So don't go away. Come right back and you'll hear more cool stuff in the story. Thanks for joining. And again, thanks, guys, for everything so far.
So welcome.
It's our pleasure.